validated. All right, so there are 9 criteria required to make the sort of official diagnosis of BPD. It can be a very difficult disorder to diagnose. It has been historically very stigmatized and mislabeled. And as I look back at my own clinical training, I always thought of it as this sort of elusive, extreme end of behavior, which it can be. But because I think we have this sort of unfair stigma, it doesn't help clinicians understand it and diagnose it and therefore provide appropriate and proper treatments. And today, there are some very good treatments for BPD. But if you're watching this as a child of BPD parent, it is not your job to get your parent to treatment. You can provide information and share and encourage, but please know it is not your responsibility to also take care of their treatment as an adult, because the reality is if you had a parent like this, you are probably still struggling with the ways that this parent struggles have impacted your own struggles. So let's get started. As I said, there are 9 possible criteria options. You must meet 5 to have a clinical diagnosis. You want to make sure that the person creating the diagnosis understands this disorder, is well trained, also understand there's a lot of comorbidity around other,
Tone rewrite suggestions for Grammarly Premium, a feature designed to help professionals build strong, productive relationships at work.
Issues like depression, anxiety, trauma. And so all those things can make it difficult. But there's a certain sort of formation of BPD that we see. And as I said before, it goes back to that sort of devaluation, idealization, mood instability, relational instability, identity disturbance, impulsivity, and those, and a few more I'm going to discuss. All right, so the first one is the fear of abandonment is very much the core of BPD. That's number 1. And this can be real or perceived abandonment. And when I say abandonment, I mean that everything from the littlest slight to you didn't open a gift of hers on time the way she wanted, to you actually leaving the room, to you not calling her back, to you not responding to a text message, to you not thinking she's the greatest mother ever and reassuring her of that in a moment when she felt insecure or unsafe. And so abandonment really is everything from emotional abandonment to relational to psychological, mental, or physical. And that really is one thing that differentiates BPD among all others. Now, as an adult, it can manifest in your BPD mom, because of her fear of abandonment, has created a very unhealthy relationship with you. You're her best friend. You're supposed to be her caretaker. You're supposed to take care of her. You're responsible for her. And because if you've been the person she's chosen to be the person to not leave her, then you often feel a great dependence upon her too. You might have this love-hate, like I can't live with her, I can't live without her. But that fear of abandonment will drive everything she says and does, because at the core, her greatest fear is you or someone she loves or close to leaving her. And so she overreads that in anything and everything, especially if she's untreated and not taught the skills how to navigate that. Number 2 is unstable and intense relationships. This is that roller coaster dynamic where you never know what you're going to get. She has loving good relationships and very unstable, chaotic relationships. And as a child, it can mean that, 1 minute ago, she was super happy with you, and now your relationship is strained and not good, and you are the bad child. Or, you might be rejected because she's in a bad place emotionally, and your relationship doesn't feel safe and consistent. She has a hard time attuning and being safe and secure with herself. Therefore, she has a hard time being safe and secure with you. And so you can feel like you're close to your mom doesn't like you anymore. That relational instability will always be there from the time you're a child all the way through adulthood if she remains untreated. The next one is identity disturbance. And the way this looks like as a kid is that your mom never really knows who she is, right? She might change her clothes, her hair color, her wardrobe, her job. She has a sort of vacant sense of self that she's always looking to fill up. And so you might see her go through several iterations of who she really is. And so that can, like I said, it can just continually change. The next thing we see is number 4 is impulsivity. This is a big part of the BPD brain, I believe, that it's like that executive function, as we know, is often limited. And so they have a feeling, they feel rejected, the impulse to act on it is so quick that they don't even have time to sit back and think about it. And so you might see a parent who impulsively is upset with you, so they rip your paper in half. They might tear down your bedroom. They might lose control emotionally, right? But that impulsivity makes them act out in ways where you don't really know what you're going to get, and it can happen very quickly and very unexpectedly. Number 5, in terms of the criteria, is recurrent suicidal behavior, suicidal thoughts, or ideations, and this can really vary from actual suicide attempts to threats of suicide, to engaging in self-harm. It can be a parent who threatened they were going to kill themselves, but then didn't, who actually tried several times. There's a pretty high rate of suicide attempts with BPD. And so as a child, you may have actually seen a parent attempt suicide or threaten suicide or talk about suicide in a way that wasn't meant to just, of course, it may have been in an effort to sort of not have you leave them. It could have been manipulative, but it's also because they really feel in those moments so out of control, so wounded, that seems like a good option and moment, and that's why it can be so dangerous. Number 6 is what we call affective instability, right? So it's basically mood instability. Their moods are all over the place, and they can change minute by minute, day by day, hour by hour. And this is important because it often gets confused with bipolar. But with bipolar, we can see more like days at a time of a certain, behavioral mood combination. Whereas with BPD, we really can see it like you guys, you were at the breakfast table and you guys were good. And then 5 minutes later, she's blown up and destroyed the kitchen and she's raging at you and at your dad or her partner or other sibling. And it's just like all the time. You never know when she's going to be in a mood. She might be crying, she might be anxious, she might be sad, she might be rageful, but you're going to see a lot of unpredictability and mood instability, which is what I said at the beginning, is a huge part of this. And so if you were like, yeah, my mom was like all over the place, like I just never knew what mood she was going to be in, that can be a part of this disorder. Number 7 is feeling empty. As I was saying, they often have this sort of, this sort of emptiness inside that can never be filled. And as a child, it might look like, you never really know how to fill their needs. They often show themselves to be listless, and unhappy, and not fulfilled, and it's never enough. And you might feel like you're never enough because you can't fill her up. You can't give her what she needs. And you should just know that that is often driven by their own deep well of emptiness inside and their search to fill that. And yet, because they often get in their own way, that creates more emptiness as a result. The next one, number 8, is inappropriate displays of anger and rage. I would say that this is another one of the big hallmarks of BPD, is that they blow, and when they blow, they are scary. They are rageful. You can be afraid of them. In fact, many kids who have BPD parents will say, I was terrified of her as a kid, and I'm still terrified of her. Like when she really loses it, her face gets red, she screams, she yells, their brain basically loses the ability to navigate 0 to 60, and so they just hit 60. And when they do, there's often a take no prisoners dynamic, and it can be really scary and really dangerous, especially if it manifests in some sort of loss of control of their physical self, emotional self, psychological self, especially if that's directed towards you. Even if it wasn't directed towards you and you witnessed it, right? That continual exposure to rage and anger is a huge part of BPD and something you will definitely see as you look back on your childhood. Now, as a result of that, they can often feel remorseful later and then they feel bad about themselves, right? So they get stuck in that loop. And I wouldn't say they're always remorseful. They often have a hard time, owning their behavior, although some will apologize so that you won't leave them. And so because they often also have poor self-awareness and poor self-insight, it can be hard for them to see that their behavior was out of control, wasn't justified, was scary. So you may get an apology or remorse later. They might feel bad inside but never express it. Then they feel bad about themselves and they act that out again, or they never really do own it because in those moments they were justified because you made them angry. But you will definitely see some form of anger and probably a lack of it improving or getting better if it's untreated in a BPD parent and mom. And the last one is stress-induced sort of psychosis, dissociation, and it really is that stress induced. I think it's that fear of abandonment, that emotional chaos, the roller coaster, some relational issue, that sense of self that's so disturbed that they can.
Your voice, your message, your story is needed now. Give your story a voice in a bank account. There is a need.
Go into sort of a childlike dissociation, or they have psychic abilities and they're connecting to that. But the core really triggers that is that deep sense of self that gets so wounded, that's emotional triggers, those difficulties in navigating their brain's capacity for dealing with emotional disruptions and fear of being left and wounded. And so that kind of manifests into this, like I'm saying, it looks like a dissociation, but really, or a psychosis, but really it is the core of all those other things I just discussed that feed it in terms of borderline. So I hope if you watch this and you've been thinking, well, is this really my mom or not? Of course, you can't make a diagnosis, I can't make one, but having someone get referred to a proper clinician would be a great place to start. As I said, it is not your responsibility, but if the person's open to treatment, and many times borderlines are, that they can get that support they need. There are some great therapies like DBT and others that can really help them. But remember, like I keep saying, it is not your job to help them. But I hope this description, as you watch it sometimes, I think it can be like, it can seem so extreme. Or when you think about my mom raged a lot. Yeah, she kept changing who she was a lot. Yeah, she never could keep a relationship with me or anybody else. Yes, I felt parentified. I was always in charge, or I was her best friend, and it felt like a boundary violation, or she wouldn't respect my boundaries. Or when I went through adolescence, I pushed back. She couldn't handle it, and combined with everything else I just discussed. If it helps you understand that you need to get support and treatment because there's a specific impact on you with a parent like this is where I hope it helps, right? Not to label or stigmatize or make worse, but to just make sense so that we can begin to get the healing and validation that we need. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and please stay safe and well, and don't forget to subscribe. And I really appreciate your posting and sharing your story.
Individuals with borderline personality disorder, or BPD for short, can come across as very obsessive, and the person of their obsession is often referred to as the favorite person. But this is not the only instance where obsessive behavior can manifest for someone with BPD. I'm Lisa Blanc, therapist and life coach, and today I'm talking about 10 obsessive tendencies that are very common in people with BPD. But if you do display some of these obsessions, please don't automatically assume that you have borderline personality disorder. This is a serious and complex cluster B personality disorder that is better left diagnosed by professionals. So today I'll present these 10 obsessive behaviors in the first person as they were shared with me by individuals with BPD. Please keep in mind that although these obsessions are common, it does not mean that every single person with borderline personality disorder will experience these in the same ways.
Why are you not investing in tax funds? No, seriously, why are you not investing into one of the most incredible real estate strategies?
So let's jump in with number one. I am obsessive when it comes to love. I fall in love so deeply, so quickly. I'm flooded with lust and get overly attached almost from the instant I feel a connection with someone. I get so love drunk and quickly start feeling like I'm craving them, like a drug. And at first it feels great. I feel safe, I feel happy, and the void. So I pour all of my time, my attention, my energy into them, and I try to be whatever they want me to be. I give them whatever I think they want. I do sweet things for them. I think about them 24/7, and they become just like an addiction. But then at some point, I start getting scared, anxious, insecure. I guess it's when the love hormones start dying off, and then I start noticing all their faults, blaming them, and even hating them. and I switch back and forth from love to hate, pulling and pushing until eventually the relationship comes crashing to an end. So what I want to point out here as a therapist who has worked with many clients with BPD is that this is not a game. The person with BPD is not faking love or intentionally trying to hurt you unless they have antisocial traits. Their love bombing and sex bombing